But we begin tonight with the January 6th insurrection. More specifically, what went down before the violent mob stormed the U.S. Capitol at a quote-unquote news network called Fox. As author and journalist Brian Stelter notes, by the time Donald Trump spoke at the Ellipse on the 6th, right-wing media had been promising a showdown in D.C. for weeks, and Fox had been adding fuel to the fire.
You, the American people, deserve better. It is a national disgrace how some states have handled this election.
The Democrats have been trying to both block his presidency, to overthrow his presidency through impeachment, as well as absolute, in my judgment, treason.
If we don't fight on January 6th on the floor of the Senate and the House, that is the joint meeting of Congress, on these electors, we're done.
Even that very morning, Fox was covering the events that led up to the insurrection like they were participants, playing up that there would be drama on the Hill and turning it all into a spectacle.
It's not hyperbole. It feels like a constitutional tinderbox for a lot of the reasons Will Cain pointed out. We are at an inflection point where both sides of the country believe fundamentally different things, and no one's bending right now. We believe the president will take the stage at 11, actually, and then the big show continues on Capitol Hill with the fight over the Electoral College.
What big show? At that point, the election was over. The courts had spoken. The counting of electoral votes on the 6th was just a formality, one that happens every 4 years with zero media attention or fanfare. It's like announcing the Oscar winner. You open the envelope and say the name. You don't decide then and there who the winner is. That part has already been done. But Fox wanted viewers to believe that this was different. They also took Trump's lie-filled speech in its entirety live, even when he said this.
And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
And so that is what his supporters did. And what was Trump doing when all hell broke loose, just like he called for? Absolutely nothing. Reporting from ABC News this weekend reveals new details that Special Counsel Jack Smith's team have uncovered about Trump's refusal to help stop the attack as he sat watching TV inside the White House. Sources said Trump's former deputy chief of staff, Dan Scavino, told Smith's investigators that as the violence began to escalate that day, Trump was just not interested in doing more to stop it. Sources also said former Trump aide Nick Luna told federal investigators that when Trump was informed that Vice President Mike Pence had to be rushed to a secure location, Trump responded, "So what?" Also, sources said after unsuccessfully trying for up to 20 minutes to persuade Trump to release some sort of calming statement, Scavino and others walked out of the dining room, leaving Trump alone. That is when, according to sources, Trump posted a message on his Twitter account saying that Pence, quote, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done, unquote. More than half an hour after Trump was first pressed to take some sort of action, Trump finally let Scavino post a message on Trump's Twitter account, telling supporters to back law enforcement and stay peaceful. It was at 2:38 p.m. Now, Trump is set to appear in court tomorrow as his lawyers argue that he is immune from prosecution for his attempt to overturn the election because he was president at the time and it was all part of his official duties, which, spoiler alert, it was not. At that point, his only official duty was to pack up his stuff and go home to Mar-a-Lago. Joining me now is Timothy Hafey, former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, and Brian Stelter, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, host of the Inside the Hive podcast, and author of the book Network of Lies. And Brian, I do want to start with you because your Twitter thread inspired this segment.
Thank you.
And I want to take you back. Well, thank you, because it was a good reminder that Fox didn't just start lying about the election on January 6th and trigger that Dominion and the Smartmatic lawsuits because of what they did that day. It was leading up to that. They were actually giving their viewers false hope, right, about the fact that somehow Donald Trump's loss could be reversed.
Right, I'm promising a fight. That's why I'm so glad you're framing it this way, Joy, because all the coverage over the weekend of the January 6th anniversary, look, I was a part of it. I was part of the problem, probably on social media. We all focused so much on that single day, and there's a lot of good reasons why. But January 6th has become shorthand for something much, much bigger. And I think that's the challenge for anybody reality-based, Democrats, moderates, independents, Chris Christie, anybody in the reality-based world. We've got to make clear that we're talking, when we say January 6th, about something that actually built up for months and months and months. Ultimately, this is about the entire Trump presidency. And what went wrong on January 6th is because of what went wrong in those months and even years beforehand. So when you talk about what Fox was saying in the lead up to January 6th, frankly, I think it's been grossly overlooked. I think it's been dramatically overlooked. That rhetoric from Mark Levin, from Jeanine Pirro saying, we need to fight, we need to do what the Revolutionary War soldiers did, right? What our ancestors did. That was incredibly incendiary in the days leading up to this attack. And yes, we know that some rioters bought plane tickets and flew to Washington because of what they were being told on television, because of the lies that were being spread on television. So I think it's an underappreciated part of the story. I mean, look, Joy, on the afternoon of January 6th, Fox stars told the truth. They covered the riot. But it would be a little bit like me, you know, if I'm at home and I'm ignoring the laundry, I leave the oven on, I let the dishes pile up in the sink, I forget to bring my kids home from school, and then my wife's mad at me. You know, it's like I shouldn't be surprised at that point that I've ticked off my wife. And I'm sorry, honey, I would never do that. But you know what I mean, Joy. If you let this go on for weeks and months, you can't be surprised by the outcome.
By the outcome, and yet you have these texts, sort of, you know, Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity and Brian Kilmeade, you know, doing these emergency texts. Get him off TV. Can't you make a statement? Get him off TV. The president needs to tell the people. I mean, they're the ones who were making their viewers think that he could actually reverse his loss.
They acted so surprised. That's what I mean about the husband and wife analogy. They acted so shocked that something was going wrong. You know, the most interesting text to me of all is the one from January 5th. When Sean Hannity messages Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and says, quote, I'm very worried about the next 48 hours. What did Sean Hannity know? What did he think was going to happen on January 6th? Why was he so worried? He's never answered that question. But, Joy, that's why the January 6th as a shorthand is actually about something that went on for months and months. And frankly, if you're President Biden, if you're a Democrat, if you're the Biden campaign, you need to focus less on January 6th as a date and more on what happened on the months before and, frankly, the weeks after the attack.
And that brings me to you, Tim Heaphy, because the January 6th Select Committee was so brilliantly sort of put together a timeline of what happened on January 6th. But Donald Trump is about to go into a district court, Tim, and try to make the argument that what he was doing on January 6th was somehow part of his official duties. But we're talking about a timeline of lying about the election that dated back actually before the election, when Donald Trump was essentially saying, if I don't win, it was rigged, and then was leading people, along with people on Fox, to believe that the election couldn't be legit if he didn't win. So when he goes into that district court, what his lawyers do, can you think of an argument they can make that somehow ties what he was doing to his official duties? Because that's what he would have to do in order to get out of this case and have immunity.
No, Joy, I'm having a hard time imagining what universe it can actually exist in which this can be seen as part of the president's official duty. Elections in this country are run by state governments. That is part of our federalist system. The electors are selected and identified on December the 14th. They send their officially certified certificates to Congress to be accepted on January 6th. The president of the United States has absolutely no role in that. You could argue that in the beginning, if he hears about some allegations of election fraud, files lawsuits, that's his prerogative. His Justice Department looks into them. Again, all of that happened and they found no evidence. And Jack Smith is going to present lots and lots of evidence that the president was told repeatedly that there's just no evidence to support this incendiary rhetoric. So I have, again, a really hard time imagining how that could be classified as part of his official responsibility. Look, just because you're president of the United States does not mean that absolutely everything that you say and do is connected to your official responsibilities in that office.
And what do you think the significance of Dan Scavino's testimony will be? I mean, this guy's been he's been around Trump since he was like a teenager. He was his social media guy. But Jack Smith has subpoenaed the phone records to decide who was texting what. And it seems that Dan Scavino had his hands on the phone or whatever apparatus Trump was using to tweet when he tweeted the "don't beat up law enforcement" text. But when Trump tweeted about Mike Pence, he was alone in the room. So what is the significance of who was saying what when Jack Smith finally gets this case back?
Yeah, Joy, really, really significant that Dan Scavino now is cooperating. We subpoenaed Dan Scavino and he refused to come and provide information, claiming executive privilege. The grand jury has the ability and the special counsel has availed himself of the adjudication immediately of an executive privilege claim. He won and forced Dan Scavino to talk. He was next to the president at all times. Everyone told us that Dan Scavino was the guy, essentially was the gateway to the former president's Twitter account. He held the phone and oftentimes would be the one typing out tweets. So he is in the room all afternoon on January 6th. It really matters in terms of evidence because Jack Smith has to prove that President Trump specifically intended to disrupt the joint session. If he now has a witness who says the president was resistant to issuing a statement to call off the violence, that suggests that he wanted the violence or he wanted the joint session to be disrupted. It's very strong evidence of the key issue in the case, which is the president's intent. And it comes from his right-hand man. Hard for the former president to argue somehow that Dan Scavino's lying or is incredible when he's been his right hand close confidant for years.